I toured 2 nursing homes last month in one afternoon, and I came home with my mind made up for the first time in 3 years. I'm Walter, 82, retired carpenter, 9 years on my own since I lost my Helen. If somebody started leaving brochures on your kitchen table, this one is for you. Start with the first thing I did and stay for number 5 because that's the 10 minutes that decided it. Number 1, I got there 20 minutes early on purpose and I sat in the truck and counted the cars in the visitor lot. That's the first thing I'd tell anybody to do, and it costs you nothing and requires no permission from a soul. It was a Tuesday, about 1:30 in the afternoon. Not a weekend, not a holiday, an ordinary weekday, which is when you want to see a place, and which is precisely when nobody schedules a tour. First place, I counted 9 cars in the visitor section. Second place, later that same afternoon, I counted 3. Now that is not a scientific measure, and I'd not pretend it is. It was one Tuesday. But I sat in that truck at the second place and looked at 3 cars in a lot with room for 40, and I thought, this is what a Tuesday afternoon looks like here, and there are 100 and some people inside that building. Ask the question straight out when you go in. How many residents get a visitor in a normal week? They may not know. The way they answer when they don't know will tell you a good deal. Whether they say we don't track that, or whether they go quiet, or whether somebody's face does something. If you're walking this road alone, subscribe so you don't have to walk it alone. All right, number 2, and it isn't only the number of cars, it's who's in them. At that first place, 2 of those 9 had somebody sitting in the driver's seat at 1:30, engine off, not going in yet. I recognized that immediately because a person working up to it is a person who comes often enough to find it hard. Now, I walked those halls looking at people's hands because I am a carpenter and hands are the only thing I've ever read properly. 45 years I could tell you a man's trade in about 4 seconds by looking at his hands. It's not something I decided to do. It's just where my eye goes, and it has gone there since I was 19. So I went down a corridor at the first place and past a big room off the side of it, and what I was doing without any intention at all was looking at what 40 pairs of hands were doing. And I want to describe this carefully because there's a cheap version of it, and I'll not do the cheap version. Most of them weren't doing anything. Folded, or flat on the arms of a chair, or holding the arms of a chair, which is a different thing, and you can see the difference from across a room. Now here's where I have to be honest, and it's the thing I got wrong for about the first 10 minutes of that tour. I looked at that and I thought, that's what this place does to people. And that was not fair, and it was not right, and I worked it out about an hour later at the second place, and it's the most useful thing I brought home with me all day. Because at the second place, I went past a similar room, and there was a woman by the window with a lap full of green beans and a bowl in front of her, snapping them. 80-something, not an activity anybody had organized. She had beans, and she was snapping them, and there was a kitchen somewhere that was going to use them. Her hands were busy, and her face was entirely different from the faces in the first room. And it was not because she was a better sort of person or in better condition. It's that somebody in that building had handed an old woman a bowl of beans. That's the whole of number 2. Look at the hands. And when you see them idle, don't take it as a verdict on the people. Take it as a verdict on the place, because a room full of idle hands is a room where nobody has thought to give anybody anything to do. I'd walk out of a place where nobody's hands are doing anything, and I'd not need to see the dining room. And there's a second half to the hands that I want to give you, because it's the part that actually applies to anybody's father. You can tell how long somebody's been in a building by their hands, and I don't mean the skin. A man who's been in a place 3 months still has hands that are looking for something. They move. They pick at a cuff. They turn a cup round. They go for a pocket that isn't there. That's a man whose body still expects a job. A man who's been in 18 months in the wrong sort of place has hands that have stopped looking. I saw both of those on the same corridor, and I could not have told you which was which by their faces. Now, I'd been in that building about 20 minutes at that point, and I want to be careful because I am not a doctor and I'll not pretend to be. There are 100 reasons a person's hands might be still, and most of them have nothing to do with the building they're in, and I have no business guessing at any of them. What I'm telling you is what a carpenter noticed. That's the whole of my qualification, and I'd not stretch it further. But I'll say this much, and I'd stand behind it. In 50 years of walking onto job sites, I could tell you inside of a minute whether a crew was working or being kept. And it was never from the schedule board. It was the hands. A crew that's being kept has men holding tools they aren't using. And there is a version of that in a building full of old people. And once you've seen it, you cannot unsee it. And the good news is, you don't need any training whatsoever to spot it. You need about 4 minutes in a corridor. That woman with the beans is the whole of it. She was 80-something, and she was doing a job that had to be done and that somebody would have had to do if she hadn't. Ask them, when you're in there, what do people here do that the place actually needs doing? If the answer is a list of activities, that's not the same question, and they've not understood you. Activities are things arranged for people. I'm asking what people give. I asked it at both places. One of them had an answer straight away, and the other one talked about a craft afternoon. Before the next one, tell me in the comments whether you've toured one of these places and the one thing that stayed with you. Just a line. There'll be somebody reading that comment section tonight with a folder on their kitchen table and no idea what to look for, and you'd be doing them a kindness. I read every single comment, and I answer as many as these old hands allow. Number 3. Then I stopped in the middle of a corridor and shut my eyes for about half a minute and listened. I do that in buildings. I've done it my whole working life. You can hear a bad joist and you can hear a room that's out of square, and it's a habit I couldn't break now if I wanted to. Here's what I heard at the first place. Televisions. 4 or 5 of them from different rooms, none of them the same program, all of them at a volume that meant nobody was actually watching. Underneath that, a machine humming somewhere, and a cart with a bad wheel a long way off. Voices? I heard 2 staff talking to each other about a schedule. That was it. Half a minute in a hall with 100 people in the building, and I heard 2 human voices and 5 televisions. Now the second place, same exercise, about an hour later. I heard a radio, one radio, somewhere off to the left. I heard a woman laughing at something. I heard somebody's family. You can tell a family talks differently. And I heard a man's voice reading out loud, slow, the way you read to somebody whose eyes have gone. That last one stopped me in the corridor because I knew what it was. There's a woman named Ruth Bergeron in a place over toward Orono. She taught my daughter in the 4th grade. She's been in that building 5 years, and she reads to 4 or 5 people on her floor most afternoons, and she is doing considerably better than some men I know who are still in their own houses. She told me once that she was miserable her first year, and then she asked one of the girls on the staff whether there was anything she could do, and the girl found her something, and that was that. She asked. Nobody offers an 86-year-old woman a job. So when I heard a man reading out loud in that corridor, I knew exactly what I was hearing. And that building went up in my estimation more in 4 seconds than it had in the previous half hour. Sound tells you what a place is. It's free and it takes 30 seconds, and no brochure can arrange it in advance. Now, I'd add one thing about the televisions, and then I'll move on, because I've been hard on them, and there's a reason beyond my own preferences. I haven't had one since mine broke in the 2nd year after Helen died, and I never replaced it, and I've talked elsewhere about why. Short version, I'd had it on 11 hours a day and could not name one program I'd watched that week. So I know what a television in a room means when nobody's watching it. It means somebody has decided that the silence needs covering. In a house, a man does that to himself, and it costs him his own evenings, which is his business. In a building with 100 people in it, somebody else has made that decision on their behalf, at scale, and every one of those rooms is a person sitting in noise they didn't choose. That's what I heard at the first place. Not entertainment. Silence being covered, room by room, all afternoon. And the second thing I listened for, which I'd not have thought of if I hadn't spent 9 years alone in a house, learning what mine sounds like at 2 in the morning. I listened for whether there was anything to hear. A house that's alive makes noise. Mine ticks when the temperature drops. There's a stair that creaks. A window on the east side rattles in a north wind and doesn't in a west one. And I can tell you which way the weather's coming from without opening my eyes. 9 years I've listened to that. It's how I stopped being frightened at night. Those 2 buildings were sealed, both of them. No weather, no wind, no wood moving. Nothing but machines and televisions and a cart with a bad wheel. I'd not have predicted how much that would bother me. I stood in a corridor and understood that if it came to it, I'd lose the sound of a building working, and I'd only just got that back. That's not on anybody's list either. But it's one of the things I'd go back and check for. And at the second place, there was a window somewhere down the hall that somebody had opened, and I could hear the road. And I'd add one more thing to listen for, which I only worked out afterward, driving home. I never heard anybody call anybody by a first name across a room. Think about what that means. In a house, in a street, in a shop. People call to each other. Somebody says a name across a space and somebody answers. That's most of what living among people sounds like. In both of those buildings, every exchange I heard was a staff member arriving at a person and speaking quietly to them at close range. That's care. It's not company. 2 old people calling something to each other down a corridor. That's what I'd want to hear, and I did not hear it in either place. And I'd want somebody to tell me whether that's a Tuesday afternoon thing or a permanent condition. I've thought since about why it matters, and here's the best I've got. For 54 years, there was a woman in this house who would say something to me from another room. Not important. It's cold in here, or the kettle's on, or that dog is back in the yard. That's the noise a shared life makes, and I did not know it was doing anything at all until it stopped, and I've spent 9 years finding out that it was doing a great deal. A building where nobody calls across a room is a building full of people being attended to individually, which is not the same as a building where people live together. Ask about that. Ask when residents talk to each other and where it happens and whether anybody's arranged for it to be possible. Number 4, I listened to how the staff talked, and there were 2 things I was listening for, and only one of them is obvious. The obvious one is names. Do they use them? At both places, mostly yes. That's a low bar, and most decent places clear it. The second thing is the one I'd have missed if I hadn't spent 45 years on job sites listening to how foremen talk about men who aren't in the room. Do they talk to people or about them while the person is sitting right there? At the first place, a woman on the staff, and I want to say plainly that she was not unkind, she was pleasant to me, and she was clearly tired. She stopped by a chair and said to the fellow showing me around, in front of the man in the chair, "He's been a bit down this week." The man was awake. He was 3 feet away. He heard every word of it. And then the 2 of them moved on, and nobody said anything to him at all. That's the thing to listen for. It is not cruelty. It's not even carelessness exactly. It's what happens in any building where the people who work there have too many people to look after and start, without ever deciding to, treating some of them as furniture that has a chart. At the second place, I watched a young fellow, couldn't have been 25, crouch down beside a chair so he was at eye level with the woman in it, and ask her something and then wait for the answer. And she took a while over the answer. He waited. That's what I saw. A young man with a great deal to do, waiting. There's a third thing I'd add, and it's about the voice they use. You'll know it when you hear it. That bright, high, slowed-down voice people use on small children. Somebody's mother, 90 years old, taught school for 30 years, and there's a person addressing her the way you'd address a toddler. I heard it once that afternoon, and I'd have walked a man out of my crew for it in 1980, and I'd not have raised my voice doing it either. And I want to say the fair thing here, because it would be easy to make villains out of people who are not villains. Those young women and men are doing a job that I could not do. I want that on the record. I have built houses in February in Maine, and I would not last a week doing what they do, and most of them are paid an amount of money that would embarrass you if I said it out loud. The woman who talked over that fellow in the chair had 11 people to see before the end of her shift. I don't know that. I'd bet the house on it. So when I say listen to how they talk, I'm not asking you to find somebody to blame. I'm asking you to find out what the building is doing to good people, because that's what you'd actually be moving your father into. Not a floor plan, a workload. Ask them the ratio, days and nights and weekends, because weekends are different and nobody tours on a weekend. And then ask the one that matters more, which nobody thinks to ask. How long have your staff been here? At the first place, the fellow showing me round had been there 5 months and could not tell me. At the second place, I put the question to the young man who'd crouched down beside that chair, and he said 7 years. And he said it like a man who was slightly proud of it. 7 years. That's the number I'd want. Because a building where people stay is a building where somebody will know your father's name in 2031 and know that he was a carpenter and know not to move his things about on the windowsill. And a building where nobody stays is a building where he starts over with a stranger every 4 months. At 88, when starting over is the one thing he can least afford to do. That's not in any brochure. Neither is the wage. But the wage is why they leave, and the leaving is what your father will actually experience. And the whole chain runs from one to the other. And I'd ask one more, which I got from a fellow at the diner whose wife was in a place over in Brewer for 2 years. Ask whether the staff eat there. Not a policy question. Just watch or ask straight out. He told me that at the good place his wife was in, the girls on the floor ate the same food in the same room, and that at the one before it they didn't, and that he'd worked out afterward it was the single most reliable thing he'd noticed in 3 years of visiting. I did watch at both. And I'll leave that where it is, because I'd not disparage a business by name or by implication, and because it's the sort of thing you're better off seeing with your own eyes on your own Tuesday. Number 5 now, and this is the one I promised you. It's the reason my mind is made up, and it's the 10 minutes. Remember I said number 5 is what decided it. Here it is. I asked to see a room, and then I asked to be left alone in it for 10 minutes. They were not expecting that. I could see the fellow work through it, whether it was allowed, whether I was all right, whether this was going to be a problem. It was an empty room, nobody's things in it, waiting for whoever came next. And he said he'd be at the end of the corridor, and he went, and I sat down on the edge of that bed. Now, I've done a version of this before. About 4 years ago, I lay down on my own workshop floor on purpose, in the middle of an afternoon, with nothing wrong with me, because I wanted to know what I'd actually be able to see and reach if I ever went down out there. I found out 3 things in 20 minutes, and one of them changed which way that shop door swings. You can't learn a room by walking through it. That's the whole principle. You have to stop in it. So I sat on that bed, and I want to tell you exactly what those 10 minutes gave me, because it was not what I went in for. The first thing is that I looked out the window. That's it. That's the whole of it, and it is the thing that decided everything. Because from that bed, at that first place, I could see a parking lot and the brick side of the next wing. That was the view. A lot and a wall. And I sat there and did the arithmetic that nobody does on a tour, which is, how many hours? If it comes to it, and it may, I would spend a very great number of hours in that bed looking out that window. Not days. Hours, one after another, thousands of them. And that rectangle of glass would be very nearly the whole of what I saw of the world. That is not a small thing. That may in fact be the largest remaining thing. And I've been reading about this for years. I keep the clippings in a drawer out in the workshop, and I've never once seen a checklist for choosing one of these places that had a line on it about what you can see from the bed. Not one. There's a line for the dining room, and a line for the activities, and a line for the ratios. Nothing about the window. At the second place I asked again, and they let me again. and I sat on that bed for 10 minutes, and out that window there were trees, 4 of them, in a bit of lawn, and past that a hedge and the road going by. I watched a fellow walk a dog past that hedge. Took him about 40 seconds to cross the window, and I thought, I could do that. I could watch that. That's the moment. Sitting on a stranger's bed in a building I don't intend to live in yet, watching a man walk a dog at 82 years of age, that's when 3 years of arguing with my children ended. Because I have got a window at home. It's the east one in my kitchen, and I've looked out of it every morning since 1971, and there's a row of cedars on the other side of it that Helen picked out over my objection when I wanted something quicker. I look at those trees every day of my life. First thing, before anything else gets in, and I had never once, in 3 years of this argument, been able to say what I was actually defending. I'd said the shop and the wood and the stairs and the fire, and all of that was true and none of it was it. It's the window. It's what I look at. It's that the first thing I see in the morning was chosen for me by a woman who is not here, and that a parking lot and a brick wall would be the end of that arrangement. 10 minutes on a bed, and I could finally say it out loud. Now, I'd tell anybody touring a place to ask for those 10 minutes, and I'd tell you what to do with them, because there are 4 things I got out of that room, and only the first one was the window. The second thing is the sound, again, but from a bed rather than a corridor. Lying back on it, what can you hear from that room with the door open? At the first place, I could hear a television in the next room clear as if it were mine. At the second, I could hear the road, which sounds worse and is a good deal better. A road is the world going past, and a television through a wall is somebody else's noise in your room. The third thing is the door. From that bed, at the first place, I could not see out the door into the corridor. The bed faced wrong, which means a man lying in it sees nobody go past, and nobody going past sees him. And he is in a room with 100 people in the building and no line of sight to a single one of them. At the second, the bed faced the door. I lay there and watched 2 people walk past in 10 minutes, and one of them looked in and nodded at me. A complete stranger, and it took him no effort whatsoever. That's a design decision somebody made with a pencil, and it will determine whether an old man is in a room or in a building. And the fourth thing, the one I'd not have got any other way. I found out how long 10 minutes is. That's what sitting there actually taught me. On a tour you're moving, and somebody's talking, and 40 minutes goes by like nothing. Sit still in one room, and 10 minutes is a considerable stretch of time. And I thought about a Tuesday in February in that room, not the tour. An ordinary Tuesday in the winter with nothing on, and the 10 minutes I just spent multiplied out across an afternoon. That is the honest unit of measurement for one of these places, and nobody applies it. Everybody tours in a group at 11 in the morning and forms an impression, and nobody sits alone in a room for 10 minutes in the middle of the day and does the arithmetic. I'd not sign anything without it. I'd not let anybody sign anything for my father without it. Now I'll say the harder half because I've been building toward one place over the other, and I owe you the balance. Both of those buildings were clean. Both of them had people in them who were plainly good at what they do. Nobody was mistreated in front of me, and I've no reason to think anybody is mistreated behind me. The first place had a fellow in the lobby playing a piano, badly and with great commitment, and 2 women sitting near him who were plainly there for it. The second place had a smell in one wing that I did not care for and could not identify. There is no perfect one, and I'd not go looking. What there is a place that fits a particular person, and the particular person in this case is a man who has spent 9 years looking at a row of cedars every morning and has worked out at 82 that this is the thing he cannot do without. Somebody else would walk into that same room, look at the parking lot, and not care in the slightest. They'd care about the piano, or the food, or the road being too close, or being 22 minutes from a daughter instead of 9. So don't take my 5 things as the list. Take them as evidence that there is a list, and it's specific to a person, and it will not be on any form. The whole job of a tour is to find out what your own list is. Mine turned out to have one item on it, and it took 10 minutes on a stranger's bed to find out what it was. Number 6. And here's what I actually told my children in the truck on the way home. Susan drove. David came up from Portland and met us there, which he had arranged without making a thing of it, and the three of us went round both places together, which was their idea and a good one. And in the truck going back up the road, I said something I had never said to either of them in 3 years. I said, "It's the second one." And I said, "I'm not going yet." And then I said the part that mattered, which was, "When it happens, that's the one. And I've told you now, so nobody has to guess in a bad week." Nobody said anything for about a mile. Then Susan said, "Thank you, Pop." And David didn't say anything at all, which from David is a good deal. Now here's what changed in me, and it's the reason I made this talk. I stopped being afraid of it. Not because the place is nice, though it is decent, and I'd not slander either building. The first one had good people in it too, and I've no doubt somebody is well looked after there. I stopped being afraid because for 3 years I had been fighting an idea, and an idea has no edges to it, and you cannot ever win. Now it's a building. It's a building with a name and a road and 4 trees outside a window, 22 minutes from this house, and I have sat on the bed. You cannot be frightened of a place you sat down in. That's what I found out, and I'd not have believed it in the spring. And I'll tell you the last thing, because it took me the whole drive home to work it out, and I've thought about it every day since. What I was actually afraid of was never the building. Every room I have lived in since June of 1963 has had Helen in it. This house I put up in 1971. She chose the window. She planted the bed along the south side. She's in the door frame in the kitchen where we mark the children every June. And that room I sat in has never had her in it and never will. That's the fear. That's the whole of it, laid out plain. And it took an empty room in a strange building to get it out of me. Going there means going somewhere she has never been, for the first time in 63 years. There's no arrangement that fixes that. Not a better place, not a nicer window, not 4 trees instead of a wall. But it helps considerably to know what you're actually afraid of. I spent 3 years arguing about stairs, and I was frightened of something else entirely. And my children were arguing back about stairs, and none of us knew. So, the parking lot on a Tuesday. What 40 pairs of hands are doing. What a corridor sounds like with your eyes shut. Whether they talk to people or about them. 10 minutes alone on the bed, looking out the window. That's what I'd do again, and I'd do it in that order. And I'd take my children with me. I'm 82 years old, and there's a chest of drawers on the bench in my shop with a 3rd drawer to fit in the morning, and I am going nowhere for a good while yet. But when it comes, it's the one with the trees. Everybody knows. Nobody has to guess. And that's a considerably better way to leave a thing than the way I'd have left it in the spring. Now, I want to say 2 things to the sons and daughters, because I know some of you are watching and you're the ones with the folder. The first is, take him with you. Do not go and look at 3 places and come back with a recommendation. I know exactly why you'd want to. You'd be sparing him an afternoon he'd dread, and you'd be doing it out of kindness, and it is the single worst thing you could do. Because a man who has shown a decision has been managed. A man who sits in the truck and counts cars alongside you has made one. Same building, same outcome, quite possibly. Entirely different man walks into it. I went round both of those places with my son on one side of me and my daughter on the other. And it was the first time in 3 years that the 3 of us were on the same side of anything. Not because they'd won, because there was nothing left to win. We were all just looking at a building. The second thing is, let him say no to one of them. That's the whole of it. If he goes and looks and has no power to reject anything, he hasn't chosen. He's been walked through. The choosing is in the refusing. I said no to the first place in the truck on the way home, and my children did not argue with me for 1 second, and I've thought about that since. They could have. There were reasons. It's 9 minutes closer to Susan. It's a newer building. The piano fellow was a point in its favor. They said nothing. And what that told me is that this was actually mine to decide, which is the thing I had not believed for 3 years, no matter what anybody said out loud. You cannot tell a man he's in charge. You have to let him refuse something and then not argue. And I'd say the last thing to the men my own age, and then I'll let you go. I put this off for 3 years, and I'd tell you plainly that it was fear, and I'd tell you the fear was misfiled. I thought I was frightened of the place, so I refused to look at the place. And every month I didn't look, the thing in my head got bigger and less like a building and more like an ending, because that's what an unexamined thing does. An hour and a half on a Tuesday afternoon, and it turned back into a building with a road outside it. That's not courage. I'd not have anybody thinking that. It's the same thing as finally opening a letter you've had on the table for a month. The opening is nothing, and the month is what cost you. Go and look. Take your children. Sit on the bed. And there's one last piece of this that I've not said to anybody, including my children, and I'll say it here because that seems to be what I do now. Driving home that afternoon, somewhere south of Hamden, I worked out what I'd actually been doing for 3 years. I'd been treating that decision as the end of my life. That's what I was refusing, not a building. An admission that there's a last chapter and I'm in it. And what I found in that room, sitting on a bed I don't intend to sleep in yet, is that the last chapter has been going on for a while, whether I look at it or not. I'm 82. I've buried a wife and both parents and a good many friends. The chapter started some time ago, and I've been living in it perfectly well and enjoying a fair amount of it. Naming the ending it didn't bring it closer. That's what I'd expected, and it's exactly wrong. Naming it made the part before it clearer, which is the only part I'm actually in. Here's what I mean, plainly. I woke up the morning after that tour and made coffee in Helen's green cup and stood at that east window and looked at those cedars. And I saw them properly for the first time in about a year, because I now know what it is to sit in a room where the window has a parking lot in it. There is nothing like 10 minutes in the wrong room to show a man what he's got in the right one. That's the thing the tour actually gave me. And it wasn't a building at all. It gave me my own kitchen back. Every morning since, that window has been worth something specific. Not a habit, a specific thing that I've measured and that has a number of mornings attached to it that I can't know, but that is finite. I'd have said before that I appreciated my life. I'd have meant it, and it wouldn't have been true, not in the way it is now. You can't appreciate a thing you assume. That's the whole of it. And the only way I found to stop assuming this house was to go and sit for 10 minutes in the place I'd end up without it. If you're at the start of all this, if the brochure's on the table and you haven't opened it, and you don't know what you'd even say, I made another talk about exactly that, about the 5 things I said to my children at this kitchen table, and the 3 conditions I wrote down on a yellow pad. It's right there on the screen. The kettle's still warm. I'll see you there.